couple of minutes notice when my time's running out. Thank you. Monsieur le Président, je voudrais commencer par féliciter et remercier mon ami et mon collègue de Brome-Missisquoi. Son travail sur ce projet de loi montre qu'il est un ardent défenseur des intérêts de ses électeurs. Comme un éducateur et comme un député, il est constamment en contact avec les membres de sa communauté et il comprend que les gens qu'il représente se préoccupent de notre environnement. Mais le député de Brome-Missisquoi est également un combattant pour nous tous au niveau national. Cette initiative n'est pas seulement dans l'intérêt de ces combattants, elle est dans l'intérêt de nous tous. Je le félicite d'avoir pris cette initiative et pour amener un tel projet de loi réfléchi et soigneusement construit à la Chambre des communes. Il a commencé un important débat à la Chambre sur quel genre de gouvernement que nous voulons et ce que nous attendons de notre gouvernement. Monsieur le Président, nous devons toujours tenir compte de l'impact que nos décisions peuvent avoir sur les générations futures. Le projet de loi C-440-21 sert à nous rappeler que dans ce domaine, nous ne pouvons pas avoir la vue courte. Nous avons la responsabilité de faire en sorte que toute la législation introduite à la Chambre répond aux besoins d'aujourd'hui sans compromettre les besoins des Canadiens demain. Comme mon collègue l'a expliqué, ce projet de loi ferait en sorte que nous restons engagés à la loi fédérale de développement durable qui a été adoptée à l'unanimité par la Chambre en 2008. C'est une idée très simple et c'est quelque chose que je pense que tous les Canadiens attendent de leur gouvernement. Cette idée que si vous passez une loi disant que nous soutenons le développement durable, qui en fait, toutes nos lois seront conformes à ces principes du développement durable. L'idée de mon collègue de Brome-Missisquoi est simple et élégante. Because not only would this bill put sustainable development at the forefront of all federal government decision-making, it would also integrate sustainable development principles into the policy-making process itself. It would guarantee that all government decisions are in line with the principles of sustainable development that we all seemed so committed to just 5 years ago. Bill C-481 does this by reinforcing legislation that already exists. It turns our current strategy for sustainable development into an effective strategy. Unfortunately, the Conservative government doesn't share my same priorities on the environment, or I think the priorities of the majority of Canadians for that matter. The Conservatives have spoken several times about the importance that they give to the Federal Sustainable Development Act. Past ministers of environment, and by now there's quite a roster, have said that the Act ensures that the federal decision-making process on matters of the environment is done in a transparent and coherent manner. But while Conservatives like to mention the Sustainable Development Act, they're all talk and no action. The government has not been interested in the principles of this Act, but they do like to use it as a talking point to distract Canadians away from the government's dismal record in promoting sustainable development and their failure to act on the environment. Much like they like to use the word conservation without acting or talk about their missing in action oil and gas regulations, it's all about drawing attention away from their failure on these issues. And as I've said in the House before, what we need is less rhetoric and more meaningful, forward-looking action. In the past few years, because of this inaction, we've seen a regression. We're actually moving backwards, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative government has been systematically dismantling environmental protection laws and using the least transparent methods available. And for proof of that, we don't have to go back too far, just to 2012, when the government's infamous omnibus budget bills, C-38 and C-45, were passed, two of the most destructive pieces of legislation that I have ever encountered. This government has consistently disregarded the principles of sustainable development by using omnibus legislation to weaken environmental protections and passing that legislation without proper examination or debate. Gutting the Fisheries Act, ransacking the Navigable Waters Protection Act, muzzling scientists, completely obliterating the National Roundtable on Environment and Economy, and continuing to subsidize the oil and gas industry with $1.3 billion a year does not sound like sustainable development to me, and neither does denying the science behind climate change, willfully ignoring the effects of global warming, or failing miserably to meet low emissions targets that we've committed to in international climate negotiations. You know what else doesn't sound sustainable, Mr. Speaker? Since coming into power in 2006, the Conservatives have cut Canada's targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 90%. That's not sustainable. It's actually irresponsible. Our actions now mean that we're burdening those Canadians who will come after us. The Federal Sustainable Development Act was supposed to signal a change in how the government makes responsible and environmentally conscious decisions on behalf of Canadians. But it's been 5 years since this legislation came into effect, and the government has still failed to make this crucial transformation. Mr. Speaker, implementing an effective sustainable development strategy is an attainable and necessary goal, and it's about time that we respect the commitments we made to Canadians in 2008 by passing this bill. We already agreed unanimously to the principles of this bill, so let's give it some teeth. This bill offers an efficient strategy to achieve this by giving the Department of Justice the responsibility for reviewing bills and ensuring that all proposed legislation responds to the criteria laid out in that piece of legislation, the Federal Sustainable Development Act, that we all passed. So we're not asking for a complete overhaul here. This isn't about red tape. It's not about another level of bureaucracy. It's a change that we can actually implement now. And C-481 really should be implemented. The Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development noted that in the integration of sustainable development in decision-making, well, that it's an incomplete process. Enabling C-481 would help us bridge that gap. Operationalizing an effective approach to sustainable development has worked well in Canada, and it has already been done at the provincial level in Quebec. My leader, the leader of the NDP, in his role as Quebec's Minister of the Environment, Sustainable Development and Parks, wrote North America's first sustainable development law and amended Quebec's Human Rights Charter to create the right to live in a clean environment. Not a privilege, Mr. Speaker, but a right. And that's the attitude that we should have in this chamber when we talk about legislation, when we debate ideas, when we think about how to work together to create a better Canada. It's a right that we need to work toward. It's a right that we need to work hard to protect. So in my last few moments, I'd like to turn your attention to the people who live in our ridings that we as members of Parliament represent. There are people in every riding across this in every riding across this country, families in every riding, families in Victoria and Yellowknife and Winnipeg and Toronto and my home riding of Halifax. And as legislators, we have accepted the responsibility to represent those people, to represent the hopes and dreams of our constituents. And for many of those people, their hopes and dreams are better lives and brighter futures for their kids and their families. But as it stands now, our children and grandchildren are set to inherit the worst environmental, social, and economic debt that the country has ever seen. This is not intergenerational equity, Mr. Speaker. It's not a future that's bright, or a future shining with promise. It's a future that I'm afraid of. It's an injustice to leave behind this legacy to the generations that follow ours. The reality of the situation is that if we don't go forward sustainably, if we don't legislate for the future instead of just thinking about the short-term gains, then we're not working to defend the hopes and dreams of our constituents or the people they care about most. We aren't doing our jobs as legislators. We owe it to future generations of Canadians to pass this bill. For them, sustainable development shouldn't be an afterthought, window dressing, or a buzzword. An effective sustainable development policy demands that the principles of sustainability be a part of the policy-making process from the start. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.